Dean Kelly. I'm the founder of realiseme.com. I'm your host for this event. I'd like to thank you for those who have joined us this afternoon. I really do hope by the end of this session that you leave with many new ideas and thoughts around addressing EDI in your schools, equity, diversity and inclusion, and helping to create a more fair and balanced environment. The agenda is that we've got two brilliant speakers who have achieved extraordinary things in their careers, but now use their skills, knowledge and expertise to help promote more inclusive and equitable working environments across both schools and technology companies. As mentioned, I'm realiseme.com. We're a schools workforce management platform. And the reason that we work within the ED&I space is that we remove unconscious bias from the recruitment process and a few other things. We're also a social enterprise, and our award-winning platform is something that was built in conjunction with UCL Institute of Education. So we're purely education focused. And as I just mentioned, I've worked in this sector for 25 years. I would love to ramble on about Money We Save Schools and all the other brilliant things we do, but that's not why you're here. So as a forerunner, I'd like to start with, for us, equity, diversity and inclusion in education is essential for teachers and students. Every school, every education setting wants to make sure all their learners can thrive and reach their full potential. By raising awareness of all the strands of diversity, eliminating discrimination, promoting equality of opportunity, and fostering good relations, we definitely, we're setting up our children, our young people to be good global citizens and to appreciate and celebrate the diverse environment and society that we actually live in. I'm not going to be stat heavy on anything, but just as a forerunner to our speakers, within England, only 14.1% of teachers are from an ethnic minority background, yet 33% of primary school children and 30% of secondary school children are from an ethnic minority background. What is kind of far worse than that is only 1% of head teachers are Black and only 1.5% of head teachers are Asian. And this is from a pool of well over 22,000. So it shows that not just getting teachers of a BAME background into schools is difficult, but promotion and career progression seems to be super difficult. And we'll hear, I think, more of that from Anne later on. So at realiseme, we totally believe it starts at your front door, starts at the beginning. It's about you aligning your values and your goals and your aims for your schools with your recruitment processes, your sourcing, your onboarding. And that way you're going to create more engaged and diverse learning environments. So that's enough for me. I'm just going to get on to our speakers. We have Anusha Nirmalananthan. Hopefully I've got close to pronouncing that right. I know I butcher it most times. And Ann Palmer. Now, I haven't just Googled brilliant EDI speakers. They're two amazing people that we work with, that we partner with, and we know very well. We're gonna kick off with Anusha, and then at the end of Anusha's talk, if you've got any burning questions, please put them into the chat or put your hand up. We could answer a few then, but what I'd prefer to do is if we can then move on to a short introduction and Anne, and then have a collective talk at the end and see if we can answer any questions that you may have. So Anusha, I'll do an introduction. Anusha is somebody who's been a leader in tech for over 15 years, working with some of the best known companies in the world, even working with the gods of technology in Silicon Valley. She's the ex-head of product and growth for eBay and Just Eat, but she now spends her time as an EDI keynote speaker for TLC, Lions, helping to support inclusion, diversity and mental health. Anusha also works with tech companies that have a purpose. So like us, Anusha is an advisor and a mentor to our product manager. So I'm gonna, without further ado, pass the floor over to Anusha, and I believe you're going to share some slides with us.
I am. Thank you very much for that introduction, Dean. I'm just going to share some slides. Hopefully you can all see a few slides on the screen. Thank you very much for that introduction, Dean, and for inviting me to speak today. Yeah, I'm going to share with you sort of 15 years, it's actually closer to 20 years now, if I really think about it, of experience in the tech industry, and my journey with it in diversity, equity and inclusion. Just a little bit of personal background about me. So I started my computer science degree at the University of Cambridge almost exactly 20 years ago. And at that time, there were about 100 people in that cohort. And when I graduated, there were only 3 women. And if I'm honest, I don't think I saw a person of colour ever. I didn't work with anyone who was a person of colour. Things have changed and improved. There's still a really long way to go. But I think as I've had that experience of developing my career, I've learned a lot along the way. So when I graduated, I went to Microsoft. I worked in the States for a while for a few different startups. And then I was a senior leader at eBay and Just Eat. And it's at those 2 companies where I'm mostly going to tell you some of the anecdotes and stories of how we challenged ourselves and how we improved the environment for everybody working there. So just a little bit about why this matters. One of the great things that I've seen improve over the last 10 or 15 years is there's a lot of research that shows that diversity really makes a big difference, a big impact, not only to our kind of social day-to-day, but also to the bottom line of the business. So this is some research by BCG, which showed that diverse teams produce almost 20% more revenue. Their products are more relevant because they're able to adapt when they have challenges in the market. People from different perspectives and backgrounds can share different insights and ideas and play off each other. And actually the outcome is a lot better. And I've seen that happen in real life as well. How I'm going to structure my talk for the next 15 minutes or so is to talk about just 3 powerful questions, which are fairly simple, but I think if you have them in the open, they can really help to move things forward. I believe as a leader, the questions that we ask really set the tone for our team and our organization about what matters. So I'm going to dive into the first one. So how could we reach a wider talent pool? When I've entered organizations, it's often been an issue that there's a particular group of people or a community that the leadership team have realized we're not getting, enough applicants from this group. What can we do? We're doing everything. And people get into a mentality of like, well, they're just not out there. We can't find them. And the first step is to believe that it is always possible to reach a wider talent pool. And there are just some practical things that you can be trying to do things a little bit differently from the way you have previously to reach that group. As a real example, at Just Eat, when I joined, there was some analysis that found that only 7% of the technical engineering roles were filled with women. That's below average across the industry. And it was a big shock when everybody kind of looked at those numbers. But for my own department, where I was the head of technology, over the course of a year, myself and my head of engineering, who didn't look or sound anything like me, he was older than me, he was white, he was male, lovely person, but ethically, very different to me. He and I shared that problem of how do we make our team more, at least, gender diverse. And by the end of a year, we had out of 5 roles, 4 of them were filled by women. And in our department of 30, we had 35% women in technical roles. So we were able to prove that outcome was possible. And we did, I feel we really changed the way that hiring was done at Just Eat, just full stop, and opened people's eyes. So what are the things that we did? Firstly, joining community events and social media. You can find networks that are really niche nowadays online. It's one of the good things about social media as opposed to one of the bad things. So we attended those hackathons, Women in Tech. And what I've sometimes found is that people sort of put a job advert out there and just expect the candidates to kind of roll in. The reality is you've got to be where people are gathering, where they're talking to each other, where they're supporting one another, listening and hearing what's happening in their communities, in order to be able to connect and reach out. So it's got to be a little bit more of an active role as opposed to a passive one. Secondly, a little bit of tech. You can use technology to reduce the bias in the language of your job descriptions. So for example, a job description that has your managing and directing is very different to a job description that is you're supporting and coordinating. You've immediately told your candidates an awful lot of stuff about you and your organization. And the idea is to try to be more balanced. The third thing is to display the salary range openly and any flexibility options. So at eBay, we could offer some international visas. At Just Eat, there were actually some part-time working options, which was really, up and coming for tech, that I hadn't seen that before. And this, alongside salary range, part of it is also in order to address the gender pay gap, the ethnicity pay gap, there's a campaign to sort of not ask people their current salary level and make a comparison to that when making an offer and giving a percentage increase, but instead to sort of look at your own salary range and through your interview process determine the skill set, the knowledge, the experience this person is bringing to the role, and make them an offer based on where you'd think they would fit in their organization. And that's a way to sort of prevent that lower salary levels for minority groups from being perpetuated throughout their career. And that one is close to me because I know in real life that did actually happen to me while I was at eBay, unfortunately. And it was only when I became a manager 2.5 years later that I realized what had happened. The fourth example here, suggestion here, which I'm sure many of you have considered already, is just to remove unnecessary requirements. Sometimes there's just sort of baggage and history that we just do the same things. At eBay, one of the things we did was to remove the requirement for a technical or maths degree in order to apply for an engineering role, or even the role that I do, which is product management. And what we realized was that if you finish a degree 5 years ago, if you haven't been keeping up with the latest tech, doing projects on the side, you're not really your technology knowledge is not going to be up to date. And it's just not relevant anymore that you had a tech degree before. And I still see nowadays roles for CTOs that are requiring people to have maths degrees. And it's just, you're just rejecting a whole bunch of people who've actually got the passion to get into those roles. And we had a lot more interesting, varied people apply when we removed that requirement. And then finally, when I've been a hiring manager, one thing, and if I've been hiring multiple roles and I'm working with agencies, I ask those agencies to provide me with a balanced shortlist. So if they're going to be providing me 10 candidates, for example, I would just ask them to be more balanced. So I wouldn't necessarily specify a particular type, but I will tell them that if I'm finding that their shortlist is all the same, everyone's the same ethnicity, everyone's the same gender, I'm going to have an issue with it. And I will let them know, I'll give them feedback, but I would like to see next time around that they've put some effort into reaching the candidates that I know are out there because I've hired them before and I'm one of them. So I really push that, and that really helps to deliver structural change throughout, systemically as well. So I'm going to go to the second big question, which is what can we do to make the process more fair and accessible? I think with this, your process, your interview process is very, very tailored to your organization and what you're looking for. But there can be some quite subtle things that you can do and some bigger things. So I'll talk about, I've sort of got two of each. So the sort of first thing I wanted to mention was the concept of a blind CV. So at eBay, we had a bit of technology that would take CVs in and it would hide the candidate's name as well as the institutions where they've worked. So me as a hiring manager, I would just see what the candidate did in their role and not where they did it. So I really assess the capability of that person, the skills of that person. And however wonderful and lovely I might be, however open-minded I want to be, there are going to be biases and assumptions that I bring with me. And so this technology allows you to remove that from that screening process. And I personally, I found that helpful. It's not necessarily valid or useful in every circumstance, but at eBay with what roles I was hiring, it was helpful. The second thing is to have behavioral or task-based interviews. So we structure our interviews in a different way than 20 years ago. I remember going to interviews and I would meet the manager, then I'd meet the manager's manager. It would all be sort of one-to-one and a lot of grilling, not very interactive. Now the interviews we do are collaborative and they're task-based. So we ask someone to do an activity that would be a typical task that they might do when they actually come to join us. So doing a presentation, doing a brainstorming, activity. So we see them at work as opposed to judging them based on things that they've done in the past, but we don't really have, real life evidence of. We actually bring them in and ask them to do that with us. The third thing to consider, which I consider a sort of smaller thing that you can do, is to balance your interview panel. Who is actually doing the interviewing? And it's a really small thing that I think a lot of organizations don't necessarily think about. But for me, as a woman of color walking in, if I've realized that I've got a panel of 3 people and they all look the same, once again, you've told me something about your organization, and I'm going to have doubts about whether I will feel like I can be part of the space that everybody looks the same and I look really different. And it's just immediate, whereas in an organization where they bring someone in, they may not have women in that particular department or people from an ethnic background in that particular department, but could you involve someone from finance? Could you involve someone from strategy? Someone who I would work with day to day, but maybe isn't a direct line manager, and yet introduce people from different backgrounds so that the panel itself is more balanced. The final thing is offering up front to make reasonable adjustments. So you can see about me that I'm a woman, that I'm South Asian, my heritage is Sri Lankan, as we found with Dean trying to say my very long name. What you can't see about me is that I have an invisible disability. So I have a chronic pain condition, which is something that people cannot see or know about me until I disclose it. And I still remember the first time I received an email and someone said, if there are any adjustments that we could make to help you during the interview process, please let us know, and we'll happily try to accommodate. And I was like, this was the first time somebody asked me without me trying to find some awkward moment to mention, what's the process? What's happening? Could we do this instead? Could we adjust it and do that differently? And this is why, and having to disclose all this stuff about me that I don't really want to get into. Just literally that 2 sentences, it made a really big difference. And it immediately made me think, this place has thought about candidate process, and they've thought about different people coming in to interview. And I love that about them. So I really strongly encourage those little tweaks that can make a big difference. Finally, the third question: how could we create a more inclusive environment? I think this is the one people think about the least. I think they're thinking a lot about, how do we get more candidates in? And they're thinking a lot about how do we make our process fair? But I don't know that they're really thinking about how do we create an inclusive environment, and what would, there's no point hiring loads of amazing people and then 6 to 12 months later, they don't feel like they belong there. They don't have that sense of community, and they've decided to move on. Like, nobody wants to see that. And yet, unfortunately, that does happen. So some examples of things you can do. So there's the very practical thing of doing some monitoring and reporting. Whenever I mention this, people panic. They get scared. What numbers? Is this, if I use this percentage, it will look positive. If I use that percentage, it will look negative. And it's not really, representative. How do I find the numbers that are going to work? I would argue that the key thing is to understand what's most important for your organization in this moment right now. At Just Eat, it identified junior level engineering talent. There was not enough female candidates coming through that process at all. So they hired 2 female graduate recruiters. They put lots of energy into joining women in tech social media organizations and just engaging with the community. Completely different at eBay. eBay was maybe 500 people in the UK office, very international, fairly gender balanced. And what they realized was that at the senior levels, there wasn't that diversity. The senior team didn't reflect the wider organization even. So they put in the effort to create mentoring programs, coaching programs, so that they could promote from within. And I personally benefited from having a great mentor, and that impacted me personally. So that was a fantastic program, but they focused on what was important for them. The last 2 things are about, variety. So create different ways for your community to connect. And I use the example of socializing, or anything that you do that sort of creates community and connection. In your organization, for example, if you regularly go for a drink at the end of the day on a Friday afternoon, and I'm talking about a typical office environment, but you always do the same thing. That's just what we do as groups of humans. We tend to have rituals. The trick is, the issue with that is that if somebody chooses not to drink, and I tend not to drink, I do occasionally, but I tend not to, there could be lots of different reasons why. It could be a personal choice, it could be a religious reason, it could be a health reason. But if you always only go for a drink on a Friday, those people are always going to feel excluded from participating in the wider community. Whereas if there's lots of different ways of connecting, there's lunch things and breakfast things and sports things and music things, people have that opportunity to suggest their own ways of connecting. There's suddenly a way for everybody to join at where they want to, where they feel comfortable. And it will create that sense of community with a wider group, a more inclusive way. The final thing and this was at the larger sort of mid to larger organizations, there were employee groups. I actually ran the women's network at eBay for about 18 months. And these employee groups often, they support one another. So women's network and LGBT network, etc. But they also often have suggestions that that were interesting and new for me. When I went into Just Eat in the office, I was shown on my onboarding tour, a quiet room. And I was like, what is a quiet room? And they said, this was a private space. I can pop in anytime, have a break, I can lock the door and use it as I needed. It was just a facility to have a quiet space. And I was like, this is fantastic. I didn't have to disclose my condition at all. But if I'm having a really bad pain day, I can go and take a break. Somebody else might choose to use that as a prayer room. There are many different ways that this room would be helpful. And this is one of the things people sometimes worry about. Well, if we have employee groups and they're advocating for this, that, and the other, how are we going to provide all those different things for those different groups? The reality is that 9 times out of 10, one change will actually positively impact everybody, and everybody will be able to benefit from that improvement. Sometimes there'll be things specific to a community, but most of the time it will benefit everyone. So small changes really help the entire environment to feel more inclusive. So just to wrap up, I really feel that these simple, open questions are really powerful, and they can help you start to have conversations about what's really happening in your organization. And you can listen and try and understand what's happening, why it's not working, where you can improve, and in all directions, to your staff, to your candidates, to other people in similar situations. Really listen hard. But the other message I really want you to take away is that everyone can make a difference. You don't have to look and sound like me to improve the diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization. Anyone can make the commitment to make a difference. And people who've helped me in my career did not sound or look at all like me, and yet they believed in me, and I knew they believed in me. And they've helped me become, where I am today, and I'm extremely grateful for that. So hopefully some of this gives you a little bit of inspiration for what you can do in your organizations. I'm going to hand back to Dean and stop sharing.
Thank you, Anusha. That was brilliant. And I was just thinking about some of the crossover actually with when you're talking about mentors and the people you've worked with, and Ann's program that myself and some of my other CEOs have been involved in. It just shows how you can get those connections working so well. And the drink thing, it's the only drug in the world that you have to make up an excuse not to take, which has always amazed me, really. But that was brilliant. If there's any burning questions, I see something in the chat. I'm just going to see if anybody. That's just to say excellent, well done. That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so I'm gonna open up to Ann in a moment, and then hopefully we'll get to some discussion afterwards. For those, again, Ann Palmer is somebody that we work with and we admire. She's a force of nature. For those in education on this Zoom will no doubt probably have heard of Ann. Ann is an executive school leader. She's a school governor, MAT trustee, a member of the NGA Diversity and Equalities Advisory Group, and a certified breakthrough coach. But more importantly, she is the founder of Victory International and the Multi-Academy Trust Race Charter, delivering advice and challenge and support to schools both in the UK and internationally. She's done some absolutely amazing work in helping BAME leaders in schools to excel and be promoted. And actually, be open to new opportunities. And I think that was one of your meetings over in Dubai the other day. I saw that posted, so that was fantastic. So look, I'm going to pass you over to the amazing Ann Palmer, and I think Ann's going to share her screen as well with some slides.
Thank you so much, Dean. Good afternoon, everybody. Really pleased to be with you. I'm not in the UK at the moment, but I was determined. Dean called upon me and I was determined to be here. In thinking where to start, there's quite a lot of overlap with much of what Anusha has said. But I'm going to go back to the statistics that Dean started with. Less than 1% of people who look like me actually get through in education through to headship. And that has driven me in my time of moving out of school leadership, so to speak, to look back at the climate that I've technically left, although we say we've never left school, and to really add much of the knowledge that I've taken with me around processes, around leadership, around system change. And very much what we do is around system change. Education's a bit of a different animal in that fewer people of colour go into teaching or get accepted into teaching in the first place. And as you start to move through into middle leadership, into senior leadership, the landscape just completely changes. But one of the things that I say to people that I work with is you're only going to be influential if you are on the right side of the table. So I know this discussion is initially about recruitment, but actually, you know, we have to talk about who's doing the recruiting. And if the recruiting starts with people that don't look like me, then we're going to have an issue. So some of what I do, a lot of what I do actually, is around motivating leaders of all description to make sure that they are the people that are able to make the decision and the people that have the influence. And the other thing I would say at this stage is there's clearly something around partnerships as well, because 1% you grow in groups. So Dean would concur that my way of working with partners is really quite different, because you can't do the work that we do absolutely alone. So partnership working is really key for myself. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And excuse because I'm on a smaller laptop at the moment. So as I've said, although we're going to talk about recruitment primarily, there are issues that we can move into regarding, it's fine just to say, let's get people of colour into the organisation, let's get more diversity in the organisation, but more people of colour leave education, leave the profession, more people are forced out of the profession, and there are statistics that can show some of what I'm talking about. So I myself have done quite a lot, and I put this up there because what I say is, to some extent, I've been quite privileged, but I've been privileged in that I've worked hard, but I've also had allies that have seen and believed in me. And Anusha said again, mentors, people that have believed in what you do, and also having significant outcomes. And the push for me around this work is the fact that having looked after thousands and thousands of other people's children, I now have a grandchild that is going to go through an education system, which is likely, if I or people that I work with don't do something around the recruitment and the retention, not come across another person of significance that looks like them. So my motivation is very personal as well as professional. So I'm going to quickly go through some top tips, and I've kind of, just so that Dean keeps me on task, I'm going to go via what I've called the 6 Ps. So we're going to start with the first one. And again, Anusha, she sort of finished with the culture and the inclusive nature of an organization. And that's my starting point. If you're changing the culture of an organization, that isn't going to happen overnight. So that public perception, all organizations like to know what external people think about them. But for me, it's not just what external people think about them. What's the inside culture? And I get a lot of people that come to me and they say, shall I apply to this place for a job? You know, what do you think? And so forth. And there's a lot of sort of things that I refer to. I might refer to looking at their website. I might refer to the types of questions they would want to ask. But there's a culture out there that is sharpening. People are now being so savvy about, do we apply to these places? Is it worth our while or not? That cultural change has to happen, and it can only happen if people start to challenge the management and the leadership. So that inclusive aspect is really, really key. What are the questions you're going to ask in terms of changing the culture? Who is going to be asking those questions? Are your governors, are your leaders trained in the types of questions that they need to be asked? What are your clients? Your clients might be the kids, could be the parents. What do they think of the culture? How are they engaged? How do they engage with that? And how do you involve them in the process? So cultural change for me is significant. And one of the things that I do in an award that I run is to make sure that the whole context of cultural change is at every level, from governance right through to the student body themselves. The other P's that I put here are positioning, preparation, and process. And I put here that in terms of organizations culturally preparing themselves. So systems need to exist whereby if people come and ask you difficult questions, you're going to be able to answer. And again, when people come to me, I say, go and speak to that company. Have they got the race charter mark? Because you can ask them anything. They are willing to answer those difficult questions. They are willing to have those conversations about promotional opportunities. They're willing to give statistics around who in their organizations are reaching those highest positions. Because again, what we're finding is that schools say that they're inclusive. You'll look at their website, you'll see lots of diversity, and yet you're going to meet with their senior leadership team and there are nobody of color within that team. The other question is, how do companies just sort of pertain to diversity by simply being a tick box exercise? And when companies come to work with me and organizations come to work with me, I ask them for statistics, I ask them for evidence, and actually what they work an action plan. And the action plan says, this is what we are currently doing, this is what we are aiming to do in the future, this is part of our process to ensure that we become more diverse. But in terms of process, the process around the actual interviews themselves, governors simply step in to interview. It's very rare that they question how the mechanics of the interview process work. HR staff, very rarely in my experience of school leadership, are trained around diversity in recruitment. They are not given the status to be able to challenge the recruitment panels around process. And I very firmly believe that HR staff at all levels need to have additional training. The only training that is considered appropriate for recruitment boards are safer recruitment training. Does somebody have something missing off of their CV? Where have they been for 2 years? Are they going to be safe to be with children? But for me, diversity is a safety issue, because you don't get it right in the first place, and you find that people of a diverse background move into an organization and move out just as quickly. So I would like to propose that safer recruitment actually does include that aspect of diversity. Testing the system at every stage. Dean has got very good systems around this in terms of and again, Anusha touched on many types of approaches, but every stage of the interview process, what are you doing to make sure there is no unconscious bias, no bias in the system? And what are your stats around that? What do governors know around what to look for? Are they trained? Training keeps coming up again and again because schools have been doing what they've been doing for years and years, and they've been doing the same way. Life has moved on. Society has moved on. So something needs to to happen. I've put here again, analysing who is applying, who is shortlisted. Again, the feedback aspect, I hear from people of colour who come to me for all different types of things, but they say, and I've done 10, 12 applications, and they don't even write back to me to say what I can do to improve. So check your processes along every stage, including what training you're going to have. In terms of progression, once people are in, that revolving door, we talk about the revolving door, make sure that you've got the support in, evaluating the recruitment process, but also what are you going to do to keep the staff very much within your environment? What kind of support mechanisms are you providing them with? And this is important because with multi-academy trusts, teachers come into one school that feels just about okay. They find that they're part of a multi-academy trust and they're working across more than one school, and not all those schools are going to have the same culture. So, you know, in terms of the growth of how we do the process for recruitment, we need to look more broadly to ensure that there are consistency of systems, so that if somebody's being asked to work across more than one establishment, that there are support mechanisms in place. Progression through to middle leadership, progression through to senior leadership. How are you retaining your staff? How are you giving them opportunities for promotion? Are you offering them coaching and mentoring? Those are really key things. Sometimes people fall into leadership and they fail because they just haven't had the support. People just expect within a busy environment of a school for them to get on and do what they do. But for me, it's about support, it's about that mentoring, it's about that coaching. Again, do they have access to the right professional development as they move through to those senior roles? And the last one really is around the accountability. We've talked about measures today. Measures are extremely important. Put those measures up on the website. Make sure you've got documents that you can refer to. X amount of candidates apply. Everybody asks for the equal sort of ethnicity of the people that are applying. You can put the data together very clearly. How many of those are then shortlisted? How many of those are pulled through to interview? What does that, those shortlisted people, what's the profile? Do you speak to the people that were not shortlisted? What is their experience? If you are going to be an organisation that's good or outstanding in every aspect, how you take care of those people that are not, that have taken the time to apply to you, but have not passed through the short listing process, for me is just as important. So I'm just going to quickly tell you a few things that quite happy for you to ask questions about these. We do an award that is a whole organisation award around looking at all these processes around diversity. And it's actually an action plan, as I said previously. It's not just a certificate. If you don't do the actions, you lose the award. And within that award includes recruitment and retention. But then what we found was that individual schools were saying, we are working really hard to get this right. What we'd like is something at sort of governorship level, directorship level, trust level, because at trust level, we're doing what we're doing at school and we're doing everything that we can. But when we look at our multi-academy trust, there are no people of colour. So how can we impact? So, in the next couple of months, we will be launching an award for multi-academy trusts. Again, I've mentioned mentoring and coaching. I've got a lot of people, some in really good positions, some that have got some excellent promotions in the last few months, but I've also got some that have been placed in very vulnerable positions, and have some that have lost their employment. And we know with teaching, that is just something that's really difficult to get back into. And there are certain things that are done in teaching that we could explore at another time. But I will work with individuals, we mentor them, we give them mock interviews, we provide feedback on their personal statements. And you know, I can say this quite confidently, that the vast majority of people that work with Fig Tree do get the positions that they want to get. But I have to clearly steer them into schools that are going to appreciate their skills and their talents. And that's so important, because it can't be that they've got the post, you know, they're excited, they're celebrating, and then 6 months' time, they simply start to run into difficulties. So that readiness for going for job interviews, getting into the post, and that support, that longer term support has got to be there. And that longer term support is all around that continued coaching and mentoring. And again, I've got clients that have been in some really difficult positions, have got the job that they wanted to get, and are now thriving. So they will occasionally dip in to tell me about their experience and to kind of you know, celebrate, but they are self-functioning. You know, the last thing that I would say, and I'm going to simply stop sharing, is that there's something around systemic change that's really needed. And I think definitely, you know, Dean's company you know, is in the process of doing this, but schools have to take the hand back. They have to shake back. They have to provide the time. They have to provide the time for training. They have to have the will, because I might be part of that 1% now, but I'm very aware that I can't change the whole of society. It's going to take school leaders to be really strategic and say, you know, why are there out of 2,000 academy trusts less than 5 CEOs of colour? You know, I can do what I can, but it's going to need a bigger change. And I'm sure that, you know, with colleagues here online, that, you know, that change will happen.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Anne, as always. I love the way, actually, because obviously you've not seen each other's slides. There was so much crossover, you know, the processes, but the questions you need to ask for those processes and how they fit together. The emotion and passion is palpable, and I'm sure everybody else on the Zoom is feeling that as well. So what I'd like to do is open this up now to see if anybody has any questions, if there's anything that they're doing within their schools or their working environments that they would just like some advice on, or anything from the talks that they would like to hear more about. So if you want to just unmute or put your hand up, any reactions, we can go to you. Oh, if not, I'm gonna ask a question, and this is balanced on both sides as well. Now, I as you know, I work with schools, and we have a platform. I work with schools for 25 years, so I get the gig, and we're going in with something that's very fundamental to what they do and can save them money, but we're saying, look, but we do all these other things. We're comparing apples with apples, but we're giving you bananas and pears and grapes and everything else for free. And what I find in the kind of environment is that that's great, but if it means us changing our working behaviors, we're not sure that we always want to put in that much energy into moving the direction or moving into the future. We're quite happy doing the same as we did before. And we all know about public sector inertia. Do you see that in schools? Do you see that in companies you work with? Just open it up to both of you. If I go to Anusha first, do you see that in some of the businesses that you've worked with? There's just caught in doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, and I think inertia is a good word for it. And Anne was talking about really needing to make systemic change so that we don't fall back into what's easy for everyone. And I think, just it's one of those things, like I didn't want to be a champion for diversity and inclusion, but just because of who I am, I am. And I can't imagine not being so. But I think what I feel, and I do a lot of speaking. I've spoken at quite a few large organizations, all kinds of industries, from like Superdrug and GSK and like 3TRC Lions. And what I've realized is that whatever in the industry, people really struggle to have the difficult conversations, especially gender's a little bit easier, especially ethnicity and disability, honestly, very rarely even comes up, which is why I tend to campaign around that. But I think the way my approach is to ask those open questions, just to say what is happening, what are the stats that you have, can you be transparent, can we have a conversation? Yes, it's uncomfortable. I even give people give a little permission to get the words wrong, say the wrong thing. That's all right. I just want to have a conversation. Don't worry too much about tripping over your language or things not looking amazing right now. I know they're not amazing, that's fine. Let's talk about where we move on from here. But not to hide what's really happening, and to try to have those open conversations, however difficult they may be. That's what I'd say there.
I see that a lot. Sometimes people want to change, but they've got to get over themselves first, to make that happen. And Anne, do you see that in schools? Do you think they're hamstrung with again, I would always say most of the, these kind of processes can be quite antiquated, because I've not seen huge amount of change in 20 odd years, other than maybe TES going online. It seems to be very much the same process. Are you seeing that in a lot of the schools you're working with?
Definitely. And I think that schools over the last 2 years have been put in such a unique position to start reevaluating absolutely everything they do. And they say that your staff are your greatest assets. And yet what we find time and time again is that because of the busyness of schools, and this isn't necessarily a criticism, how busy schools are, that we just revert to sort. This is what we do. This is how it's always done. We've always got this job description. That's what's online. So they don't venture out into, or even provide spaces for people to start to explore, if we were to approach this in a different way, what it would look like. But the other thing I would say is that I think that I keep referring to being in a unique position, in that people like ourselves can ask really difficult questions of employers, because we know that they are somebody else's employers, they're not our employers. So whilst we have that privilege, we have to use that privilege, because there are people within their organizations that just simply will not have a voice. And for me, it's important that we are their voice whenever we can be.
Absolutely. Something that's not always gone down well with schools, when I spoke to, I've done the correlation between a recruitment company and a school, and they're like, well, how's that the same? We both deal with human capital. We have no assets other than people. We're only as good as those people. It doesn't matter how great your building is, it's only as good as the people that are inside that building. And so you have to have the right culture and the right goals and the right aims and the values. And that's something that I think is the hardest thing to change. And I've seen it in my history. My company was acquired, and I took over the business that acquired us because it issued profit warnings on the stock market. And we had 7 different businesses with 7 different cultures, all trying to work together. And I thought it'd be a really easy task. It wasn't at all. It took 7 years to really move that through. So when you're working with schools or you're working with businesses, do you talk to them about this is a long-term change? You have to really sign up for this. You have to subscribe to what you want to achieve, because otherwise you're not going to get it done by next Tuesday. Do you see a lot of I suppose unrealistic timelines in their brains that we can get? Oh yeah, I can do this, that, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. I'll pass it over to Anusha again to start.
Yeah, no, I sometimes see when I give a talk, whether it's about ethnicity or disability, some of the organizations are sort of like, oh, we've done that talk now. We've had one event. We've had a bit of a Q&A. People can talk to their managers now. Yay, we're all done. And there's so much more work to be done. I think also when I was within an organization trying to transition it, sometimes it's really hard to bring up that conversation. And this is where, you know, legislation can help. I remember seeing a talk by one of the women who led the gender pay gap legislation, and that was hugely transformative. Just, you know, the percentage of women who are on boards now is so much better than 5 years ago. I've forgotten the actual figures, but it was published recently.
I think it's 50-50 now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very close. It's not quite 50-50.
You're not? Okay.
No, but it's close. It's, you know, it's sort of, you know, this almost feels, for me, that's amazing. And if I, you know, when I look at those, when I joined Microsoft, when I graduated, there was nobody in my environment like me. It was a pretty hostile, strange environment. But now I think 4 of the leaders of the biggest tech companies, so Sundar Pichai at Google, you know, there's just, they happen to all be men, unfortunately, but they all have a South Asian background, which 20 years ago I wasn't expecting to see. So I think it's, you know, partly, you know, it's not just, there's a huge amount that we can do as individuals, but I find it's helpful to sort of leverage what's in the news, what's happening right now, draw attention that's not just from us, but to use what's out there, because lots of people are having this conversation in different industries. Don't try and do everything on your own. It's a really heavy thing to try and shift on your own. You need to find your allies. You need to find those mechanisms that you can use. So whether it's some bit of reporting or whatever, to jump on that and take it forward. And you need friends to take you through, keep you going when things are tough, because you are going to get a lot of resistance and a lot of pushback if you're trying to tackle these issues. You hand over to Anne on that.
Yeah, just as with that, Anne, and where Anusha finished there with the resistance, I do see that sometimes at the senior level in schools when they're looking at that they know they're going to get resistance from other areas or somewhere along the process, and sometimes they're not really up for that fight. Is that something you encounter?
I think where we've done something slightly differently is particularly with the award that we do around diversity and anti-racism, is that we have formed a really good community of schools all over the UK who are now meeting very regularly to discuss lots of issues around diversity. So for instance, you can then help them process the different stages that they're at. We'll be doing a session, for instance, with governors around recruitment, around what they would be looking for, around the questions that they need to be asking. So depending on where their needs are in terms of their development, we have a mechanism now whereby our family of schools can come in a very unchallenging way and put key people in to become learned about different aspects of this. So that governor session is for any governor of any of our schools, for instance. And you then take away the challenge, because this isn't about competition, and we know a lot of schools run on competition now. This is about allyship, about working collaboratively, collegiately with other schools. Schools, for instance, that are in very rural areas that have no ethnicity, no ethnic staff, being able to work with schools in very urban areas where the context is really different. So we do it in a very non-confrontational way, and it's a long-term method of support. So they can come back anytime and say, look, this is a really real challenge for us. Is there anything that you guys can do to support?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. That working together, that collaborative sense. One of the other things, I'm a co-founder of the largest network of recruitment CEOs, we think, in Europe. And going back to when I first got into the recruitment space, you would never talk to another CEO, well, and anybody else from another agency. And the way they worked retention was, you were told everybody else was really bad and you were really good, and there's nowhere else you could be as successful. And we broke the mold on that. And we've got, you know, people who are in direct competition, not sharing candidates and clients, but sharing ideas, sharing what made them successful, because the pie is pretty big and everybody can learn from each other. but we've seen, you know, the competition just isn't there between them. They celebrate each other's wins. And I know we've realized when I've gone into geographical areas and I've spoken to trusts and I want to open that up, the immediate thought is I'm in competition with that school for stuff. Well, you are anyway. You know, I can look through the TES and the only difference is your school badge, because everybody's advert looks similar. What is it you're really doing that's any different? Why don't you collaborate on this? Why don't you make sure this is an attractive place? Because a crowd draws a crowd, and you can magnetize, you know, what the values and aims are of this area. And it becomes a more attractive, inclusive place as a whole. So I completely get that. It's a difficult thing. Do you see much collaboration in that kind of space, Anusha, in terms of businesses getting together, even though they might be in competition?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely improved. I remember when I mentioned I was leading the women's network at eBay when I was there. So I was I think I was just as my first role as a line manager. And we created a network of 5 other e-commerce companies that were sort of in that sort of London area. And we would meet and discuss, you know, what's happening in your environment, in your, you know, and what that helps you do is have, it's almost like a practice ground for those difficult conversations. And you say, oh, well, this is happening here. And then someone says, oh, yeah, we've had that problem. Here's what you could be doing differently. And they learn from you. And it's just extending a support network to people that you wouldn't, you know, normally, that would normally be your competitors. But on this issue, we are united. And it's that feeling of, you know, everybody wants to do something about it and can be stronger if we work on it together. And we set aside, you know, our kind of competitive aspect so that we can work together to move the needle on this issue. And it helped a lot in terms of, for me as a new leader of that group, gave me so many ideas about things that we could be doing better. And yeah, I strongly encourage you to find, you know, buddies, mentors, allies, support networks that are passionate about what you're passionate about. And they are out there. It's one of the good things about social media we maybe don't talk about enough. You can connect to anyone, anywhere. So reach out, and sometimes the people that respond, you're like, oh my goodness, you have time for me, you're willing to talk to me about this. But it's one of these overarching issues that everyone can get passionate about and get involved in. So it's a great way to get that support if you need it, if you know, to just not feel like you're alone in your organization with that problem.
Yeah, no, I love that. And Anne, is that something that you're scoping out on a wider basis for schools, to try and start with the interaction first, and so that they kind of almost ice breaking, be part of that membership of Fig Tree, and then understand all the other things they can do to affect equality in their schools?
Yeah, and we've got to understand that this is not unsurmountable stuff that we're talking about. Unfortunately, schools are obsessed with, dare I mention the O word, Ofsted, and what are Ofsted going to think and whatever. And they tend to stop looking at and doing the blue sky thinking. And when you do the blue sky thinking, you're actually getting into the very DNA of your organization. And, we're not talking things that are impossible. We're talking small steps, and having that dialogue as you're moving through. Schools can't be afraid to start taking the small steps. And they can't either be saying that we just don't have the time, but don't have the time for what? This is what I don't understand. Because it's very clear that things do not move as quickly as they should. Anusha's done some fantastic work in the tech area. I think we need about 3 Anushas in education to get things moving in that way. But we are school leaders. That's what we have been versed with. So those decisions need to be okay within our action plan, within our school improvement plan or our organizational plan for this year. We are simply going to focus on X. We're going to train up our HR staff. If our HR staff have got things to say, we are going to listen. If our staff have got things to say, we are going to listen. So it's that openness. And where for me, I feel that we are very much down a tunnel where anything that comes in that is not the norm is simply batted off, because all you need to do is get your Ofsted, all you need to do is this. And that is not a way for encouraging well-being of staff and so forth, and making sure that everybody does feel listened to and welcomed.
Yeah, I get that. See that sometimes in businesses, especially listed businesses, when there's that short-termism that we've got to affect share price and we've got to do this, and not looking at the future, and actually if they invest more in their culture and opening their minds a little bit, then they'll have a much more profitable and enjoyable future as a business or a school. I'm mindful that we said we'd close around about 6:30, so I just want to again ask if anybody's got any questions that they would like to unmute and ask before I let our speakers go. No, this has been recorded, so if you do want a copy, please let us know. If you want to speak to Anusha or Anne about anything that's gone on today, you've got my email. Drop me a line and I'll put you in contact with them. I've spoken to them both before. They're quite happy and open to have a conversation with you. If you want to know anything more about Realise Me and about how we support this entire process and some of the things that we're doing, blinding CVs, etc., and how that technology works, again, drop me an email. I'll be very happy to set you up with a demonstration just so you can see that, or just send you some information on it. But just once again, I just, if you can put your reactions, I'd like to say how brilliant both speakers were today. Loved it. I get the joy of speaking to both of them on a regular occasion. So I still enjoy it. It's great listening to both the passion and the conversation. So look, feel free to reach out. Thank you, Anusha. Thank you, Anne, especially as we've interrupted your busy schedule in Dubai. I'm sure there's a cold drink with your name on it somewhere waiting for you just now. But yeah, thank you very much, both of you, and thank you everybody else who's joined us this afternoon. It's been super interesting, and hopefully has left you with some good ideas to go away with. Right, I'll say goodbye. Thank you very much.